So the Rolex Fastnet is 604 miles. In terms of the course, effectively it's relatively few number of marks. You're basically straight out the Solent, off you go. You have to leave a lighthouse on the end of Land's End to starboard, but otherwise you're fair game around the Scilly Isles of where you want to go. There's a few TSSs, so traffic separation schemes, so where major shipping is that the race boats aren't allowed in, and then you're around the Fastnet Rock, and on the way back you actually have to leave the Scilly Isles to port and then come into Plymouth. So in terms of general setup of the course, it's relatively straightforward on that front. In terms of what you actually have to negotiate going along, it's not as straightforward. So you're looking at initially coming out the Solent and the first part of the course all the way down to Land's End. Very tidal is probably the biggest things. There's a couple of tidal gates that are quite key, in particular Portland Bill, and then also at the Isles of Scilly. And also around the Isles of Scilly there's 3 different TSSs that you have to stay out of, and also the islands, and to go round them is sometimes longer, but could be a gain if you go one side of or another, depending on the weather. So there are some quite key decisions that you have to make there, and obviously it's very dependent on the tide when you get there. Essentially, usually the most straightforward part is going from Land's End to the Rock, straight across an ocean, and it's just what the weather conditions are as to how you're going to get there. And most of the time it's a straight line, and again, much like a typical setup this year, we're looking at a southerly to a southwesterly wind, so a fetch across and a broad reach to a run down to the finish. So this year we're looking at a very light wind start, which is probably one of the biggest challenges in the race this year. Probably the first 24 hours are going to be very light, generally sub 10 knots, and at times 0. And obviously with that situation, some of the strong tides, that's going to be quite a challenge, and that will affect from the biggest boat to the smallest boat. I expect at start time, at the moment we're looking at a southeasterly, but with great temperatures and sunny day like this, a sea breeze, a southwesterly sea breeze is likely to try and develop. Today it's only just kicked in at 4 o'clock, so we could actually be sitting, even though they're starting at 12:20 to 1:50 are the start times, there could be very little wind at that point, and they could just be waiting for that late southwesterly. So it could take a good 2 to 4 hours for a lot of the boats to get out of the Solent. And then from there on, we're expecting a reasonable southeasterly offshore, so it will then be a decision of moving away from these thermal or temperature driven breezes to get into that larger scale southeasterly breeze offshore, and start to progress along with that. But ultimately what's happening is this lovely high pressure condition that we've got now is going to slowly give way to a low pressure that's currently out to the west of the United Kingdom, and that'll come across and bring in these increasing south-southwest to southwesterly winds. But obviously that's 2 wind directions, opposite directions. Something's got to happen in between, so there is what we're calling a transition zone, where basically these 2 winds meet and there's not a lot of pressure there. And so what you're looking at there is how do you negotiate what's the shortest distance through that light wind patch to get into that southwesterly. So ultimately what you're trying to do is get to that southwesterly first, and the boats that that's where the jump will happen. And with that as well, what that means is the faster boats aren't going to be able to get away in these first 24 hours. They're actually the fleet's going to stay relatively compressed, and also the southeasterly will continue for the slower boats. So effectively that will be a reasonable gain for the slower boats, especially as also that new breeze is moving across the UK. So again, that only benefits making the transition zone smaller for the slower boats than it is for the bigger boats. I expect by midnight on Sunday morning, the lead boats will be in little to no wind. Meanwhile, the slower boats will still be coming along in a southeasterly, closing that gap. Yeah, I think it's highly unlikely we'll see a record broken. I think some of the earliest routings I have for even the fastest multi-hulls are only getting in on Monday afternoon, maybe midday Monday, and for the mono hulls late Monday evening. and some of the slower boats probably not until the sort of late Tuesday, early Wednesday morning. So definitely no records, but also yes, likely to favour the slower boats because that southwesterly breeze is moving across and is building, and you'll probably find that some of the IRC 3s and 4s will see up to 25 to 30 knots on their last day coming downwind into the finish, which is always it kind of feels like the last few Fastnets have been like that, a slow start and then a sleigh ride home. Yeah, I mean, those first 24 hours are going to be really hard work. And, like you say, sail changes, working out where you want to go, what you're going to do, probably the uncertainty with the fact that the weather is changing and how that plays mentally with people. I mean, even just the fact that if after 4 hours you're still only just getting out of the Solent, knowing that you've got another 3.5 days to go, can be quite testing on the brain. But yeah, I mean, I think that would be a big focus if I was out there racing, would be to look at that, how we're going to manage that time period, so that we're making the right decisions and not getting carried away doing too many sail changes, and just making sure what are the key places that we need to be and what are the facts that we know. And really, ultimately, probably the solid facts that you know is the tide, and the weather is going to be pretty changeable.